I'm Andy Costello. I'm a commercial real estate broker. Thank you so much for being here this morning. I am licensed in Oregon and Washington, but what we're going to talk about today really applies no matter where you are located, as we're going to talk about a general overview of commercial leasing. I'm located in Vancouver, Washington. For our attendee that's on the East Coast, that's just over the Columbia River from Portland, Oregon. I started investing in real estate in 2011 after, while I was in local government management for 15 years and found my way into commercial real estate. Obviously, I'm not an attorney or a CPA, so I am just sharing with you information based on my experience, and just happy to answer some questions at the end. And I will also provide my contact information, so if you have some specific questions, we certainly can connect offline. So today, what are we going to talk about in our 30 minutes together? We're going to talk about some basic lease structures. There's 3 basic lease types. We're going to go over some basic lease language that you might hear if you're looking at leasing space or have already leased space. Some things that you should think about and maybe watch out for. Then a little bit about the process, how you get into a lease. And then if we have some time, some Q&A. But again, I promise we'll get you out of here on time. So for those of you joining us today, could you please put in the chat whether this is your first lease, an expansion of your business that you're looking to open a second location, you're shrinking your footprint, and so maybe you're looking at moving into a smaller place, or you're looking to stay in your existing place, but you're maybe going through your first lease renewal. So if you could put in the chat where you're at, that would be helpful, just so I know where people are at. So it looks like we've got a lot of folks looking at their first lease space, so that's great. Somebody going through a renewal and somebody looking to expand, that's great. And then Sharif here to learn. So thank you for engaging and letting me know where you fall in the scheme of things. So we're going to talk a little bit about lease structures. The first type of lease structure that we're going to cover is a full service lease. This is typically for office space, and this is when you have a base rent that includes all of the operating expenses. So things like utilities, the maintenance, janitorial might be included in that. And so this is kind of the Cadillac of all leases, because you're just going to pay one rate and it's going to cover a lot of things. You don't have to necessarily worry about your utility bills or anything like that, because it's just all wrapped into the type of lease that you are signing. The kind of step down from that is a modified gross lease. So you're going to pay your rent, but then you're also going to maybe pay a share of your utilities. So for example, you're in a building that maybe has one water meter, but the landlord's going to divide up the percentage of that water based on the square footage that's listed in your lease and that you're leasing. And so you're going to pay a portion of that, not necessarily the whole, not the whole water bill. And then last type of lease structure that we see a lot in retail spaces is called a triple net lease. So you're going to pay a base lease rent, and then you're going to spend some additional money outside of that base lease rent on triple net expenses. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means, but you'll see it abbreviated as NNN, which stands for triple nets. So a triple net is what is included in a triple net. It's the landlord's property tax, their building insurance, and then their common area maintenance. And common area maintenance, it can vary depending on the building, your location. For example, what might be included in a common area maintenance cost that you're going to pay in your triple nets is the management fees of the building repairs like a new roof. You're looking at landscaping, janitorial, the utilities, if, for example, the lighting that's going to be lighting the parking lot, the irrigation, you might be paying for that. Excuse me, the outside lighting, snow removal, if that's something that, depending on where you live, all of these things that you're going to could be paying. And again, it depends on the type of building, and it depends on what the landlord is looking to cover. Everything I'm talking about today, when a lot of times I get asked questions, I say it depends, because it really depends. Every lease is different. Every lease has different language. Even if the landlord is using a standard contract, you can still negotiate different language in your lease. So you always want to be sure that you understand what's in the lease and what you are signing. When it comes to triple nets and common area maintenance, as a tenant, you don't really have any negotiation to try to reduce these fees or get a reduction. What the fees are is what the landlord is passing on to you as a tenant. So you really, really want to make sure you understand your lease language, and you really want to make sure that you understand what you're signing and what you're committing to. And when it comes to these common area maintenance charges, when you're negotiating the lease, you want to make sure that you also ask for the actual expenses that the landlord has spent on the building in the last year or two, so that you can understand what you're signing up for. And you want to make sure you're not just looking at the budgeted costs, that you are looking at the actual numbers that they've spent on the last year or two, so that you can budget and you can have a sense of what those common area maintenance charges are going to be, so that you can plan on what you're going to be cutting those checks to the landlord for. So TIs, what are they? We talk about this a lot because sometimes you might be looking at a space that it's a raw shell, like the picture on the right there. Obviously, it's not built out. It's just a plain building. So we call these TIs. And so a landlord sometimes will, everything is negotiable when it comes to a lease, can contribute to the cost of doing a build out or remodeling an existing location for your business. And so what is a landlord going to look at when they decide that they're going to help contribute to those costs? They're going to look at your credit worthiness. They're going to look at how long you're signing a lease for. They are going to be looking at, what is in it for them? Because when you are doing an improvement to a space, it's not for the landlord, it's for your business. So you have to understand that if they are contributing those TI costs to you up front, most likely you're going to be paying a higher lease rate, because they are going to want to recoup that money over the term of your lease. For example, we just negotiated $50,000 of tenant improvements for a dentist that's relocating here to Vancouver from Portland. And as part of that, she needed to sign a 10-year lease to get the $50,000. So it's not necessarily that a landlord is just going to be coming to the table with cash without something in return. You need to be realistic about what you are asking the landlord to do. If you're thinking about building out a kitchenette, an office, a conference room, again, not an improvement to the landlord and to their business, that is for you. The next tenant might not want those features into the building, so the landlord's just going to consider what you need, how long you're going to be there, and what's the skin in the game for you as the tenant. So you want to make sure that when you are negotiating and you're looking at those leases, that you are, when it comes back to triple nets, that you have the ability to audit those financials. So you want to make sure that you, again, get the actual statements of what those triple nets are, because you want to make sure that you're paying your fair share and that you're not paying anything more. Now, when the landlord calculates those triple nets, they're going to calculate them based on, what they're estimating for the year. And don't worry, they will get their money. So if it's an overage, they'll either apply it to the next year of your triple net charges, or if it's an under, they're going to come back to you and ask you for a lump sum. So you want to make sure that you understand the financials that the landlord is charging you for. One of the other things you want to make sure is rent when it comes to usable square footage versus rentable square footage. For example, just signed a lease this week for a tenant. The actual square footage is 1,600 square feet, but they're paying on 2,400 square feet. And the reason is what is usable is the 1,600, but they're paying in a full service lease. They're paying for the common area that's wrapped into that. So the lobby space, the bathroom, the rest of the building that they have access to. And that's how that landlord calculates. So there's no triple nets. They just increased the square footage based on the percentage of the building that this tenant is using. So again, they're leasing 1,600, that's the usable square footage, but the rentable is the 2,400. So you also want to make sure you understand in your lease what a commencement date is. So you might sign a lease that you're going to start paying June 1st, but you might not be moving in until September 1st because your tenant improvements are going to take that long. So you want to make sure you understand how long a construction project might take for the space that you're looking to lease, because otherwise you might be paying on a space that you might not occupy for 6 months. And you want to make sure you have that in your budget. And you also want to make sure that you understand, again, what you are signing. You want to try to negotiate, obviously, the best deal for yourself, because maybe you need to negotiate that your commencement date is June 1st, but you're not going to start paying rent till October 1st because you need a month to get up and running after your tenant improvements are done. So people often ask, what are some of the challenges when you're looking to lease space that you need to be aware of? So the first is you want to make sure that what you're looking to do in a particular space is allowed by the county or the city in which your business operates in. You want to make sure that you're not looking to open an office space in an area that is zoned for multifamily apartments, because you don't want to run the risk of signing a lease and committing to that Because when you sign a lease, you are making a personal guarantee that no matter what happens, you are going to be committed for paying that rent for the whole term of that lease, no matter whether your business succeeds or fails. And so you want to make sure that that is something that you are aware of, that your business can operate where you are looking to sign a lease. Don't assume that the broker that you're working with knows, and don't assume that the landlord knows. You want to make sure if there's any question, you need to talk to your broker or reach out to the city or county in which you're operating to make sure that that is correct. And then you need to also make sure that you understand what your business needs. You need to make sure that you understand when you're negotiating what type of structure, in terms of those tenant improvement dollars. You need to make sure that you have a business plan to know, can you last in that space if you're going to sign a 7-year lease? Are you going to be able to function out of that term? Because again, you sign a 7-year lease, you are personally on the hook for 7 years. There are no outs for COVID. There are no outs for personal emergencies. You just need to make sure that you have a plan if something were to happen, that you can financially pay for the space, even if you end up not occupying it for the full term. So another thing that you need to think about is your timing. When you're signing that lease, you need to make sure that you are accounting for not only the negotiation time frame, you're making sure that there's time to get permits for those tenant improvements. You want to make sure that you are going through the process. If you need architectural drawings, then you need to go get the permits from the city or county, which in my county, just to get a simple occupancy permit, that is to take a building that's maybe zoned for 75 people to 125 people, the county has quoted 8 weeks to do that, just to change the number of people allowed in a space. That really had nothing to do with drawings or more official detailed drawings or permits, just to change the use. So you need to make sure if your lease expires, for example, in June, you really need to be getting going to be moving into that space by June now, because things take way longer than you think. Some landlords are very quick to move and some not so much. You want to make sure you have time for build out. Across the country, construction is booming. It's hard to get contractors to show up, get things done on time, and make sure, again, that you're not paying for rent that you cannot operate your business in. Also, you need to take into fact, move in. How much equipment do you have? Getting that set up, rebuilding after the walls are up. What do you need to do to get that space actually ready to open and operate? And then you need to make sure that you understand the renewals. Make sure in that lease agreement, you're paying attention to, okay, do I need to give the landlord 6 months, 9 months, 3 months, 90 days? What is it that you need to tell that landlord when you're thinking about renewing? Because when you're thinking about renewing, if you can't negotiate or you decided you don't want to stay there, again, it could take you 6-9 months to identify a new space and build it out for what you need. So you really need to make sure that you're paying attention to the calendar and giving yourself way more time than you think that you might need, because it just sometimes takes that long. You also want to think about costs. It is expensive and costly to move into a space, or can be. And then it also, you have to consider, even if you're moving from your home, from a home-based business into a space, you want to make sure that you're allocating money for the moving costs, the cost that it's going to take to be in that space. Again, thinking not just about your base lease rate, but you're thinking about those triple net charges, those common area maintenance fees that you're going to pay. Whether you're paying for utilities, you want to make sure that you have the money in your budget to cover those costs. And then obviously you want to make sure that you have enough money for those tenant improvements. Everything costs more than you think it should, especially in today's crazy construction environment. So if you're thinking about signing your first lease, what should you be thinking about? And a lot of people have said to me, Andy, it's COVID. Of course, I have all the leverage. Look at all these buildings. Look at all these businesses that are closing. And unfortunately, in this environment, that's not necessarily the case. So you really need to think about what is the situation going on with the landlord, the space, and then for you. Right now what we're seeing is that landlords are not, giving away their properties for free. You might be able to negotiate, again, some tenant improvement money and then maybe some free rent as you're getting going and ramping up. But landlords have not been discounting the cost of their cost per square footage. And I equate that to hotels. During COVID, we might have seen some discounted hotels as they're trying to get people back in. But really what they did was they took their average room rate, let's say it was $100 a night, and they said, oh, it's 20% off. So now it's $80 a night. But they have not permanently reset those room night rates that we're going to see as we come out of COVID. Those rates are going to go right back to what they were before, if not higher, to recoup the costs. So you really want to think about that when it comes to leasing commercial space. It's the same thing. the landlords don't want to reduce their cost per square foot because that cost per square foot really hasn't changed that much over the last few years. And so they're just trying to hold the line. So they're willing to give you some free rent. Again, you need to think about your time frame. You need to think about how long it's going to take you to identify the space and then move into the space and get it built out to what you need. You also want to think about when you sign that lease, let's say, unfortunately, your business is not doing well and you need to kind of reconfigure what you're doing and you need to sublease out that space. Make sure that the lease allows you to find another tenant to go in there and continue making those payments on your behalf. You also, again, make sure you read the lease. Do not rely on your broker. A good broker should be able to help you. They should be able to identify some things in there that you should think about. If you have an attorney, I always encourage people, even if you don't have an attorney, to maybe have an attorney take a look at it. But you need to understand what you are signing in that lease. Do not just blindly sign it. Again, it is a personal guarantee that you are telling that landlord that no matter what happens, you are on the hook for coming up with that money when you sign that lease. You also want to understand those triple net charges, as I talked about earlier. You want to make sure that when you get those bills for those triple nets, that you understand whether there's an overage or an underage, because if they misbill you or miscalculate based on their budget to actual, they might come back. They are going to come back to you. Not they might. They will come back to you for that money. So you want to make sure that you are budgeting to make sure that when they come back and ask for that lump sum, that you have that money to be able to pay. And then you want to also understand, what does a landlord want? Are they looking for your type of tenant? Just because you see a space that's vacant, they might not want that type of use. I've had a landlord say, well, we don't want office space in this retail, or we don't want that type of business here. And just because you fall in love with the space and you're offering the landlord exactly what they want based on cost per square foot, and you're willing to do just about anything, sign a longer term lease, the landlord has to want you in there too. So you need to make sure that you understand, again, what does the landlord want, and are they willing to consider the use that you're looking to use the space for? So again, impacts of COVID as we kind of come out of what's been happening. I just want to reiterate that we're not seeing discounted deals. People keep asking me to find them deals. Landlords are not doing that. Just like any other downturn in an economy, people that have more means and are more affluent, they're able to hang on to their buildings. We're not seeing this massive, exodus from commercial building owners leaving the market and selling their buildings. So again, they're not reducing their cost per square foot. What we're seeing is that they're willing to give some free rent. And then you want to make sure that you understand what a landlord may or may not be willing to do for you to adjust your business. And again, I do think we're coming, this year we're coming out of COVID, but you want to make sure that your business can adapt in the space that you're in. Should this go on longer than we think it is, beyond this year. Again, if you're a restaurant, make sure that the landlord might be okay with you moving outside and making some changes to your business in order to adapt to what's going on with our economy and, the government rules related to COVID. So for those, if you could please put in the chat, what type of space are you looking to lease or expand into? You can see the options here. If you could put your answers in the chat, that would be helpful. Just so I know, it looks like we've got some office space, retail, manufacturing. Okay, office. Thanks. This is helpful. Okay, some retail space. So retail, you're looking at triple net leases. Office, you're often looking at a full service or maybe a modified gross lease. Okay, some office space. Thank you. That's really helpful. And Liz, it looks like maybe you have some office to lease out. Thanks. Maybe we should talk offline. So one of the questions I get is, how do I calculate what my rent is? Because we like to use this really complicated language in commercial leasing that, when I send people over some options, it's really confusing because they don't understand what it actually means in terms of like their monthly. What is this going to cost me every month? So I wanted to kind of just walk through some the math so that you feel empowered that when you see something, you understand what the lingo is. So when you see something that says $20 triple net, right off the bat, I know that it's a triple net lease. That's what the NNN means. And it's $20 a square foot a year. That's what that means. So what are we going to do? That means that we're going to take that $20 a square foot, and let's say you're looking to lease 1,200 square feet. That's $24,000 a year you're going to pay just for the base rent. not including the triple nets. That's a different discussion. We're just talking about your base rent. So you're going to take $24,000 a year, you're going to divide that by 12, and you're going to end up at $2,000 a month for your base rent. Now, when we look at the triple nets, what is that going to cost? Let's say the triple nets are $250 a square foot a year. You're going to times that by your square footage. And so now you're looking at $3,000 a year for your triple nets. And again, estimated because the landlord will come back to you if you have an over or an underage. And so you're now looking at $250 a month for your triple nets. So your total rent, if you're just looking at budgeting, is going to be $2,250 for the month. So this is kind of how you calculate what you're looking at spending, just so you can have an idea of when you see these numbers and you go $20, I don't know what that means. This is how you do the calculation and break it down so you can answer that question for yourself. So here's some common questions I get when I'm talking to tenants is, so can I just sign the lease? We have some standard agreements from our Building Maintenance Association, the Commercial Brokers Associations. There's lots of standard leases out there, but never should you sign a standard lease without reading it, talking to your broker, making sure that you understand what you're signing. Again, every lease is different. Every lease. There is no, even on those standard forms, there are things that you can negotiate and discuss and have changed or asked to be changed. So no, never just sign your lease without understanding what you're signing and without really reading to make sure you know what you're on the hook for. So what is a personal guarantee and why is it required in the lease? And I've talked about this a couple of times and I've mentioned it. You want to make sure that when you're signing the lease, you personally are on the hook. Unless you're an Amazon or a Microsoft who's signing for space as a corporation, small business, and pretty much anything other than those two types of large companies, you are signing a personal guarantee that no matter what happens to your business, you will pay the rent. The landlords are going to want their money. So if you plan on signing a 3-year lease, but your business unfortunately closes after 18 months, you still owe 18 months of rent, regardless of whether you're operating there or not. And again, if your lease allows you to find to sublease the space and find somebody else, that's great, but you might not find somebody right away. That might take that whole 18 months to find somebody because again, your space maybe is designed for you and not what another tenant might want in the space. So you're trying to negotiate with the landlord through your broker. You don't really like what you're hearing from the landlord. Should I go ahead and sign the lease? I always say, if you don't like the relationship at the beginning, it's probably not going to get any better. So I would encourage you to probably go and find some other space. If it's just not working out there, and again, I'm not saying that they're going to be flexible and bend to everything that you want, but you want to make sure that if you're not getting a good vibe from the landlord, they're not responding, they're not helping you, that you should probably look at doing something else with finding some other space. So what type of businesses are typically triple net, modified gross, or a full service lease? And again, I alluded to this. Triple nets are typically that retail space there on the left. So, you're looking at, like a home goods store, or you're looking at a hair salon. Those are typically businesses that are in a retail space. So again, triple net, you're going to pay your base rent plus those triple nets on top of that we talked about earlier. A modified gross is usually office space, again, where you're going to pay portion of those utilities, not all of them. Again, it depends on how the building is metered for gas or water. And so you're going to pay a portion of some of the utilities. Again, every building is going to be different. And then a full service lease is typically office space where the landlord will cover everything. There are no triple net charges, and your lease rate is going to be higher to reflect that you're not paying those triple nets. So how does the landlord-tenant law apply to commercial real estate? You've probably heard a lot about this if you've ever rented an apartment, and you hear a lot about what tenants' rights are, and especially on the West Coast, we have very strong tenant rights. And so I'm going to tell you, the commercial, there is no landlord-tenant law. You basically, when you sign a commercial lease as a tenant, you are going to abide by what the landlord rules are that are listed in your lease. You're going to abide by what is in that lease agreement. And again, when COVID hit and a lot of businesses were trying to use COVID as a way to get out of their lease, there are no such provisions. You are on the hook. Really, no matter what happens, the landlord's going to want to be compensated for that full term of the lease. So you have no tenant rights in commercial real estate. Really, the only way to settle any disputes is whether the lease says you're going to go to arbitration, mediation, or you're going to go to court. There aren't really there aren't any outs for you using the landlord-tenant law. That is for residential real estate only as landlord-tenant the law. So where do I start? How do I get started? You want to make sure you understand what your budget is. You want to make sure you understand your cash flow. Can you afford to go out and lease space? You want to think about the type, the location. Where do you want to be? How much space do you need? If you're going to sign a longer term lease, you want to make sure you have enough space to expand. You want to contact a commercial broker like myself or somebody else in your market. You want to make sure that you have representation. Don't just call the number that's on the window because they're representing the landlord. It's just like when you buy a house. If you work with one broker, they're representing one party, not both parties. Then you want to talk about what you're looking for and then go start looking for spaces. Then the next step that actually formally starts the process is your broker will prepare a letter of intent for you, outlining for the landlord what you'd like to see in the lease. Your base lease rent, what your triple nets are estimated to be, what you're looking for signage, what type of business you're going to be putting in there. Then the landlord will, once you agree on what is in that letter of intent, then you're going to go ahead and they're going to prepare a lease. You're going to review it. You're going to negotiate the lease, and then you're going to sign it. And then eventually you'll take occupancy, again, depending on what is when you're supposed to take occupancy as outlined in your lease. I want to thank you. Here's my contact information. I appreciate your time this morning. I think we have a few minutes left. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. Happy to stay online and answer questions. But again, here's my contact information. Please feel free to email me, text, or call me. And I would be happy to talk to you about a specific situation if you have questions about what is going on that maybe is more personal than you might want to share in our webinar today. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. If you don't and you're just logging off, thank you so much for your time. I promised I would get you out of here in 30 minutes. So thank you so much for joining us. And again, I will hang out and answer any questions that you might have. And you can either turn on your mic and ask, or you can put it in the chat, whatever is easiest for you.
Hey, Andy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Can you go over a little bit more the arbitration, mediation, or litigation? Like I know my lease says arbitration. Can you go over that a little more?
Sure. Are you talking about like what the process is to?
I mean, I'm not doing that, but I would like to know the difference between those three things and what exactly, like I get what going to court means.
Sure. I understand. Okay, so depending, again, it'll depend on what your lease is, whether your arbitration is going to be binding arbitration. So, you know, if you get to that point where you do end up taking it to an arbitrator, your lease will say, like, this is it. Both parties are going to agree to the final arbitration. Sometimes it'll say that's the last step. Sometimes it'll say that that's the required step before it gets litigated in court. Mediation is oftentimes not binding, but it really, again, will be outlined in your lease what that process is if you end up, you know, taking something. Again, there's no standard lease, so without seeing your language that's in your lease, and I'm happy to talk to you about that offline in terms of what that process looks like. You know, arbitration and mediation are oftentimes way less expensive than going to court, but
to me, arbitration is kind of more finite, and mediation means there's a back and forth. Is that kind of a correct?
Yeah, I would say, but I've been through arbitrations where it's an all-day process and the arbitrator is going back and forth too. So
okay, that's
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, Leah.
Andy, Ralph here.
Hey, Ralph.
What is the occupancy rate versus what it was pre-COVID for the buildings?
Are you talking about like how they're doing the ratings, or
just availability, like in real estate with the housing market and so forth? I know availability of houses is shrunk, and I don't know what the availability of space is today versus what it was pre-COVID.
Sure. You're talking about like inventory?
Yes.
Yeah. So inventory for office space is a little bit higher because as leases have come up, Businesses have decided, hey, do we really need all this office space, or people are starting to work more remotely? So we do see a little bit more inventory on the office space, as well as, again, depending on where you're located, like in downtown Portland, there is a lot of retail space because people are wanting to get out of downtown Portland with what has been happening with the unrest in downtown. So there's a lot more vacancy, but depending on where you're at, this is all different, but the commercial market has remained strong during COVID, because I personally think, for example, that office space is going to come back because people are realizing that working from home is really hard to do a lot of on-the-job training and that cross learning that you get. So the market in general has remained strong. There is a little bit more office space inventory, but we're starting to see that come back, really more of just the downsizing, not necessarily the large office space. But, depending on what you're looking for, there is, sometimes it's just looking, but, there is inventory out there.
This other question is more out of curiosity, but I assume that with some of the businesses taking a pretty significant hit during COVID, that they're looking for subleasing because they're personally on the hook. Do we find a lot of subleasing going on out there right now?
There is quite a bit of subleasing going on, but the challenges with that is either the new tenant needs to be willing to agree to those lease terms, or the landlord needs to be willing to agree to a new lease. Because I showed some space last week on Alberta, and there was 18 months left, but the tenant or the landlord was not willing to renegotiate a lease beyond 18 months. So the tenant's like, why am I going to move in here for 18 months? And then in 18 months, you're going to raise my rent $5 a square foot.
Got it.
So unfortunately, that the existing business is kind of in a pickle because the landlord's making it nearly impossible for them to sublease the space, because a business wants some, commitment and continuity beyond 18 months in a space.
Thank you. After you said it out loud, it became duh.
That's okay. That's okay. It's a good question.
Great job, Andy.
Yeah. Thanks, Ralph.
This is good.
Thank you. If there aren't any other questions, I really appreciate everybody's time this morning. Thank you for being here. Again, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk to you offline about your personal situation, whether you're in the Portland metro area or not. I'm happy to chat. So thank you so much for being here.